I want you to pause for a second and listen closely. Do you remember when boredom wasn't something to escape it, something that created magic? When the day felt endless and time didn't rush you forward, it waited for you to live inside it. I do, and sometimes, late at night, I miss it more than I can explain. I remember a world before glowing screens told us how to feel, before every moment was recorded, before silence was filled with notifications. Back then, life didn't shout. It whispered, and we leaned in to hear it. If you're watching this now, maybe you're like me. Maybe you felt that quiet ache, that strange longing for something you can't fully name. A time when joy was simple, when games didn't need batteries, when connection meant eye contact, laughter, scraped knees, and coming home just as the streetlights flickered on. I want to invite you to remember with me, and if these memories still live somewhere inside you, I invite you to subscribe, so we can keep reopening these forgotten rooms together, and relive the good things that shaped who we became. I remember the 1980s not as a decade, but as a feeling, a warm, dusty feeling that clung to your skin after a long summer day, the smell of sun-heated asphalt, the sound of distant lawnmowers humming like a lullaby, the roughness of concrete under your palms as you leaned forward, heart racing, waiting for your turn. There were no screens waiting for us when we woke up, no alerts telling us what mattered. We decided that ourselves. I remember stepping outside after breakfast, the screen door slamming shut behind me, its metallic echo still ringing in my ears. The air felt alive, full of possibility. Somewhere down the block, someone was already calling my name. We didn't plan our days, we discovered them. A stick could become a sword, a chalk line could become a battlefield, a simple rubber ball could carry the weight of victory and defeat. Our games were stitched together with imagination, trust, and unspoken rules that everyone somehow understood. Time moved differently then. It stretched, it breathed. Hours passed without being counted. No one told us we were wasting time. We were living inside it. I remember the way laughter sounded before it was filtered through speakers. Raw, unpolished, the kind that came from deep in the chest and left you breathless, the kind that made your stomach hurt and your eyes water. There was a sacredness to those afternoons, a quiet agreement between the sun and the children below it. As long as the light remained, so did our freedom. And now, looking back, I realized something painful and beautiful at the same time. We didn't know we were building memories. We thought we were just playing. The games we played before screens weren't just games. They were rehearsals for life. Lessons in patience, in fairness, in loss, in joy. Some of the people I played with back then, they're gone now. Some moved away. Some grew distant. Some were taken quietly by time. But when I close my eyes, I can still hear their voices calling me to come outside. That's the strange power of memory. It doesn't ask permission. It simply opens the door and pulls you back inside. And as we move forward together, deeper into those days, I want you to remember this. Nothing truly meaningful ever disappears. It just waits for us to remember, and I do remember, like it was yesterday. By late morning, the neighborhood had fully awakened, not with alarms or buzzing phones, but with sound drifting naturally through open windows. A radio somewhere played a song you'd hear 1,000 times that summer. A dog barked lazily, not in warning, but in participation. Mothers talked across fences, their voices blending with the clink of dishes and the soft slap of laundry against the line. I remember standing there, squinting into the sunlight, deciding what kind of day it would be. Not consciously, but instinctively. Would it be a bike day, a running day, a day where we invented something entirely new? The bike was freedom, not the abstract kind, the real kind. The kind with peeling paint and a loose chain that rattled like it might fall apart at any moment. I remember the feel of the handlebars warming under my palms, the slight wobble when you rode no-handed for just a second longer than yesterday. That second felt like flying. We rode without helmets, not because we were careless, but because the world didn't yet feel hostile. The streets belonged to us. Cars passed slowly. Drivers waved. There was an unspoken trust between generations that feels almost impossible now. Sometimes we raced, not for prizes, not for recognition, just to see who could get there first. The destination didn't matter. Winning meant laughing harder. Losing meant demanding a rematch. And then there were the games that required nothing but bodies and belief. Tag, hide and seek, freeze tag, games where rules shifted mid-play, negotiated through breathless arguments and quick forgiveness. If someone cheated, it wasn't reported, it was resolved. Right there, face to face. I remember hiding behind hedges, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The smell of damp leaves, the itch of grass on my ankles, holding my breath as footsteps passed inches away. In those moments, the world narrowed to sensation. No past, no future, just now. That kind of presence feels rare today. Back then, boredom wasn't an enemy. It was the doorway. When there was nothing to do, something always happened. Imagination filled the silence, like water fills a glass. We didn't scroll to escape emptiness. We shaped it. I remember scraped knees worn like medals, band-aids that barely stuck, the sting of antiseptic, and the comfort of a familiar voice saying, "You'll be fine." Pain passed quickly. Pride lasted longer. There was a rhythm to the day that lived in our bodies, not in clocks. We knew when it was lunchtime by hunger alone. We knew when afternoon had arrived by the way shadows leaned longer across the pavement, and we knew when evening approached, because the light changed, that golden light, soft, forgiving. It made everything feel important, even the ordinary. A ball rolling down the street, a friend sitting on the curb, swinging their legs, a shared silence that didn't need filling. I didn't realize then that these moments were shaping my sense of meaning, teaching me that joy didn't require constant stimulation. That connection didn't need devices. That being seen mattered more than being watched. Today, the world is louder, faster, more demanding. But back then, life gave us space to grow into ourselves. And sometimes I wonder, if those quiet afternoons hadn't existed, would we recognize peace when we feel it now? Because every time I think back to those games, those streets, those endless days, I feel something inside me slow down, as if my soul remembers the pace it was meant to keep. Afternoons in the 1980s had a weight to them, not heavy, but full. They settled into your bones. By then, the sun sat higher and warmer, pressing gently against your skin, and the air shimmered just enough to make everything feel alive. I remember wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand, leaving a faint line of dust behind, like proof that the day was being lived properly. We played ball in the street, always listening for the distant warning shout, "Car." That single word froze time. The ball rolled to the curb. We stepped aside, and then, just as quickly, the street became ours again. The sting in your palms when you caught it wrong. We didn't have referees. We had honor, and sometimes, heated debates that ended in laughter. I think that's something we lost along the way, the mercy of being forgotten. Back then, childhood was allowed to fade softly, leaving only what mattered. Every object had potential. Every corner held a story. We wondered about it. It was a signal our bodies understood without explanation. When we finally sat still, it wasn't forced. It arrived naturally, like a closing chapter, one where life unfolded slowly, and somehow, we were exactly where we were meant to be. As afternoon leaned toward evening, something subtle began to change. The air softened. The heat lost its edge. Shadows stretched longer, like the day itself was exhaling. It was a sacred pause, and we felt it even if we didn't understand it. Our voices dropped. Our movements became less frantic, more intentional. Even our games changed. They became gentler, almost ceremonial. I remember the smell of dinners beginning to cook inside nearby houses, onions in butter, something tomato-based. The faint promise of comfort drifting through open windows. There was a trust in that promise. Tomorrow was assumed. The future felt wide and generous, not fragile, quieter, dimmer. The day's dust still clung to my skin. My body carried the evidence of living scratches, soreness, sun-warmed muscles. Silence wasn't awkward. It was shared. The ceiling fan spun slowly above me, chopping the air into steady rhythms. That sound still lives somewhere deep inside me. And now, when I think about that hour, that gentle slide from day into night, I realize it taught me something lasting. The sky deepened from blue to indigo, and the last traces of daylight faded without ceremony. I remember how natural it felt, as if darkness wasn't something to fear, but something to enter. I remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet, the fibers pressing into my legs, still warm from the day. The smell of fabric, dust, and whatever had been cooked earlier hung in the air, comforting, grounding. I remember waiting for my favorite show, counting the minutes, not with impatience but with anticipation. If you missed it, it was gone. That mattered. It taught us presence before we had a word for it. I remember voices lowering as the hour grew late, as if respect itself required softness. The ceiling was dark, but not empty. My mind filled it with images from the day. running, laughing, winning, losing. There was a spirituality to those moments, even if I didn't recognize it then. A quiet conversation between the day that had passed and the person I was becoming. Sleep came gently, not forced, not delayed by endless stimulation, just a natural surrender. A closing hand on your shoulder, a promise that tomorrow would come, and it would be waiting for you. I remember waking up early without an alarm, sunlight spilling across the room in uneven stripes. The house was quiet, but not asleep. Somewhere, a coffee maker gurgled softly. The smell drifted down the hallway, warm and familiar. The day waited patiently, like it trusted us to use it well. And then, eventually, we went outside again. We always did. We belonged to one another, in small, unspoken ways. I remember the feeling of dirt under my nails, the sharp scent of pine, the scratch of branches against my arms. The world wasn't sanitized. It met us as we were. They weren't measured in tasks, but in experiences. A long bike ride, a spontaneous game, a shared secret that would never matter to anyone else, and mattered deeply to us. Before performance became habit, before identity hardened into something we had to defend. There were entire days that seemed to exist outside of memory until, years later, when they returned with unexpected force. Not as clear scenes, but as feelings, as textures, as quiet emotional echoes that surfaced when I least expected them. We moved differently then, less rushing, more drifting. Time stretched so far it almost disappeared. And then, we stepped into them as if they had always existed. Sit with it, and somehow, survive it. Hours spent side by side, saying very little, doing a lot. Other friends faded quietly. No dramatic ending, just distance. Time doing what it always does. That trust shaped something deep inside me. A belief that I could figure things out, that mistakes weren't fatal, that life didn't need constant supervision to be meaningful. We sat on steps, on sidewalks, on the grass talking about nothing and feeling everything. The day slowly closing around us like a soft curtain. And now, decades later, when life feels too loud, too fast, too demanding, the games didn't disappear overnight, but they changed. They became fewer, shorter, and somehow heavier. I remember standing in a loose circle, leaning on bikes that had grown slightly too small. We talked more, played less. The laughter was still there, but layered with something new. Awareness, a tenderness, a feeling of standing at the edge of something unnamed. Back then, reflection had room to exist. No constant input, no endless noise, just the steady presence of your own thoughts. That moment always felt symbolic. The world gently saying, "You're not a child forever." Friends moved away, neighborhoods changed. Familiar places were repainted, remodeled, replaced. It didn't shout it. It let us discover it on our own. How we remember, and how we long. For a time when life felt wide open, and nothing needed to be captured to be real. There was a moment, usually sometime in late summer, when we began to sense it, even as children, even without words. A quiet knowing that something was shifting. It lost a bit of its softness. The shadows sharpened. The air carried a faint hint of something cooler, something final. School would return. Schedules would tighten. Freedom would shrink just a little. Orange dissolving into purple, purple deepening into blue. Each change slow, deliberate, irreversible. What we wanted to be like, what kind of life felt right. I remember the smell of fallen leaves beginning to mix with warm pavement. A scent that still stops me in my tracks decades later, because it carries both arrival and goodbye. I think about how the world today resists endings, how it distracts us from transition, how it fills every quiet space with noise. As night fell earlier and the stars appeared sharper, we walked home a little slower. Each step felt heavier, not with fear, but with meaning. Quietly, faithfully, something electronic, something that beeped, blinked, demanded attention. We were curious, of course, but it didn't replace anything yet. It was just there, like you were missing something sacred. The outside world called to us constantly, and we answered without hesitation. I remember arguments that ended in reconciliation because there was no way to disappear. You couldn't block someone, you couldn't mute them, you had to look them in the eye the next day. How to wait without panicking, how to sit with ourselves. There was a quiet introspection in those moments, a turning inward that wasn't lonely but spacious. I remember lying on my bed during those slow afternoons, listening to the rain, feeling time stretch in ways that almost felt spiritual, like the world was inviting reflection. Now, everything competes for attention. Every second must be filled, measured, optimized, like a distant heartbeat, steady, patient. There was a moment in every day when the outside world slowly let go of us, not suddenly, not harshly, just a gentle pulling back, like a tide that knew it would return tomorrow. I remember those late evenings when the neighborhood grew quiet in a different way. Not the deep silence of night, but a reflective hush. Streetlights flickered on one by one, their orange glow pooling softly on the pavement. Moths gathered. Crickets began their steady chorus. That sound, it didn't demand attention. It held space. I remember standing still for a moment, bike at my side, feeling the cooling air settle on my skin, the heat of the day slowly releasing its grip. There was something honest about that transition, something grounding. We didn't rush home immediately. We lingered, as if we sensed somehow that these moments were fragile. Conversations grew slower, more thoughtful. Laughter softened into something warmer, quieter. We talked about school, about nothing, about things we didn't yet understand, but felt deeply. I remember sitting on the hood of a parked car, the metal still warm, looking up at a sky untouched by city glow. Stars were clearer then, or maybe we just looked at them more. We asked questions without answers, about the universe, about God, about whether life would always feel this big and open. No one rushed to explain. We were allowed not to know. That permission shaped us more than we realized. Eventually, names were called again, this time softer, closer. There was a tenderness in being called home at night. I remember walking back slowly, listening to my footsteps echo. Each step felt like a quiet closing sentence, the day gently writing itself into memory. Inside, the house felt almost sacred. Lights dimmed, voices low, the outside world sealed behind closed doors. I remember washing up, the cool water shocking against sun-warmed skin, looking at my reflection not as someone I questioned yet, but simply as myself, uncomplicated, enough. Evenings held rituals, simple ones, a favorite chair, a familiar voice, a story half listened to, but fully felt. Time wasn't something we tried to control. It moved around us, not against us. And then came that quiet moment before sleep, the one no one talks about, when the day is gone, but tomorrow hasn't arrived. When thoughts wander freely, I lay there, listening to the house breathe, feeling safe in a way that didn't need explanation. The world felt held together, predictable, kind. I didn't know then that this sense of safety would become something I'd spend years trying to recreate, in different houses, different cities, different lives. That's the strange truth of memory. It doesn't just show us where we've been, it reveals what we've been missing. Those evenings in the 1980s taught me that peace doesn't come from having everything. It comes from needing very little, from days that end naturally, from relationships that aren't mediated by distance or screens, from silence that doesn't scare us. And even now, when the world feels fractured, when time feels aggressive, if I close my eyes, I can still feel that night air, still hear those crickets, still sense the quiet certainty that tomorrow would come, and that, somehow, everything would be okay. By the time adolescence began to knock at the door, something subtle started to shift, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to be felt in the quiet moments. I remember the first time a game ended earlier than usual, not because the sun went down, but because someone lost interest, or someone had somewhere else to be. It felt strange, like a sentence cut short. The streets were still there. The bikes leaned against the same fences. The ball rested in the same spot near the curb. But something invisible had changed. Responsibilities crept in quietly. Expectations. The idea that time was no longer endless but something to be managed. I didn't have words for it then, but I felt it in my body. A restlessness. A gentle pressure pushing me forward, even when I wanted to stay. Games became shorter. Conversations grew more self-conscious. Laughter still came, but it hesitated first, as if asking permission. I remember moments when we stood around, unsure of what to do next. Not bored, just different. As if the old magic needed effort now. That was the beginning of awareness, of self, of how others saw us. We started measuring ourselves, comparing, wondering where we fit. And yet, even then, the echoes of childhood were still strong. They surfaced unexpectedly. A spontaneous race down the street. A shared joke that dissolved into breathless laughter. A summer evening that pulled us back into something simpler, if only for a moment. Those moments felt fragile, like glass, beautiful precisely because we sensed they wouldn't last forever. I remember thinking, without fully understanding it, that something was ending. Not a day, not a game, an era. There was grief in that realization, quiet grief, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind you carry without knowing why. Looking back now, I see it clearly. That was the moment time became visible. Before that, time was something we lived inside. After that, it became something we moved through. The world started asking questions. What will you become? Where are you going? Who are you supposed to be? In the 1980s, those questions arrived slowly, gently. They didn't shout. And because of that, we had space to feel our way forward, to hesitate, to doubt, to dream without immediately needing answers. I remember lying awake at night, thinking about the future not with fear, but with curiosity. It felt distant, abstract, almost imaginary. The present still held weight, still mattered. That balance feels rare now. Today, the future presses itself into every moment. Deadlines, notifications, urgency. But back then, we were allowed to grow gradually, to outgrow things naturally, without shame. I'm grateful for that slowness, for that gentleness, for a world that didn't rush us out of ourselves. Because even as the games changed, even as childhood loosened its grip, it left something behind, a foundation, a memory of what it feels like to be fully present, fully alive, unobserved. And when the modern world becomes too sharp, too fast, too demanding, that memory still steadies me, like a hand on my back, reminding me where I came from. There comes a point in every memory when you realize the story is no longer just about the past. It's about the distance between who you were and who you became. I feel that distance most when I think about how slowly life once revealed itself. Back then, the future didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded, piece by piece, year by year. In the 1980s, growing up didn't feel like a race. There was no pressure to become something quickly. We were allowed to be unfinished. I remember older kids in the neighborhood, the ones we looked up to. They seemed impossibly wise. They knew things, not facts, but instincts. How to move through the world, how to carry themselves. We learned by watching, by listening, by trial and error. There was no constant comparison, no invisible scoreboard tracking our progress. You didn't know how everyone else was doing, so you focused on your own small universe. That gave life a quieter dignity. I think about that often now. How comparison has become the background noise of modern existence, how it quietly erodes contentment. Back then, meaning came from participation, from showing up, from being part of something physical and shared. I remembered the feeling of belonging without needing approval, of being accepted not for what I achieved but for simply being there. That kind of belonging changes a person. It plants something stable inside you, something that doesn't depend on attention. When I look back, I see how those early years shaped my relationship with time itself. I learned that time could be trusted, that it didn't need to be controlled or optimized, that it had its own wisdom. Today, time feels hunted, measured, chased. But in the 1980s, time felt like a companion, walking beside you, not pushing, not pulling. There's a subtle grief in realizing that kind of relationship is rare now, that many people grow up without ever knowing it, and yet, it still lives inside those of us who were there. Sometimes I feel it when I slow down enough, when I sit quietly and let memory surface without forcing it, when I notice the way light falls across a room, or the way silence still has a texture. Those moments remind me that nothing essential was lost. It was only buried under speed. The games we played before screens taught us something no device ever could. They taught us how to inhabit our own lives, how to tolerate stillness, how to find meaning without distraction. And maybe that's why these memories return now, not to trap us in the past, but to guide us back to ourselves. Because somewhere between those long afternoons and this present moment, we didn't lose our way. We just forgot how it felt to walk slowly and trust that the path was enough. There comes a moment, usually much later in life, when you suddenly realize something has vanished. Not all at once, not dramatically, just quietly. I didn't notice when the game stopped. There was no final match, no farewell. One day we simply didn't go outside anymore. Responsibilities crept in softly. School grew heavier. Time felt tighter. The world began asking questions we weren't ready to answer yet, and without realizing it, play turned into memory. I think that's one of the great illusions of growing up. We believe transitions are loud, but most of them are silent. They slip past us while we're busy becoming someone else. When I look back now, what hurts isn't the loss of childhood itself. It's the loss of unawareness. Back then, we didn't know what we had, and because we didn't know, we were free. Free from nostalgia, free from comparison, free from the fear of time running out. The games we played before screens existed in a kind of eternal present. They didn't need to be remembered. They were enough, simply by happening. And maybe that's why they echo so loudly now. Because today, everything asks to be captured, saved, shared, proven. Back then, life asked only one thing of us: to be there. I remember the first time I felt that something had shifted. Standing at a window, looking out at a street that once felt infinite, and realizing I hadn't been part of it in a while. The pavement looked the same, the houses hadn't moved, but something inside me had changed position. That's when memory stopped being passive. It became a place I visited, not a place I lived. There's a particular sadness in that realization, not sharp but deep, the kind that settles slowly in the chest. Yet there's also gratitude woven into it, because not everyone gets to miss something that pure. Not everyone had a time when life unfolded without interruption, without constant observation. Those of us who did, carry it quietly. Sometimes it surfaces when we hear a distant laugh, or smell hot asphalt after rain, or see children playing without phones, lost in something invisible and complete. In those moments, the past doesn't feel gone. It feels close, like it's standing just behind us. I've learned that memory isn't about escaping the present. It's about grounding it, about reminding ourselves that we once lived differently and, therefore, we still can. The world may not slow down again, but we can. We can remember what it felt like to move without urgency, to speak without performance, to play without purpose. Those games taught us more than we ever realized. They taught us how to inhabit time, how to be whole without being busy. And even now, all these years later, that lesson is still waiting for us. Patient, quiet, unchanged. There comes a moment, somewhere between childhood and whatever we call adulthood, when you realize the games have changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly. I remember feeling it without understanding it. A subtle shift, an afternoon when fewer people showed up, a bike left untouched against a fence, a game that didn't quite start because no one suggested it. Time was still moving slowly, but we were beginning to change. Responsibilities appeared softly at first, small expectations, short obligations, nothing heavy enough to complain about, just enough to alter the rhythm, just enough to shorten the days. And yet, even as that shift began, the spirit of those games still lived inside us. We carried it unconsciously, in the way we laughed, in the way we tested limits, in the way we searched for meaning without knowing that was what we were doing. I remember moments of sitting alone more often then, not lonely, just reflective, watching others play while feeling slightly outside the circle, not rejected, just observing. That's when memory begins its work. Even while something is happening, a part of you already knows it won't last. There's a quiet grief in that realization, a grief without language. You don't mourn the loss of childhood, you sense it approaching. I remember thinking, without fully forming the thought, someday, this will matter. And it did. Because those games weren't just something we did, they were something we were. They taught us how to engage with the world, before the world demanded explanations, before performance replaced presence, before worth was measured instead of felt. When I look back now, I see that those years gave us a foundation most people never talk about, a psychological grounding, a spiritual anchoring. We learned how to be alone without being afraid, how to be with others without hiding, how to lose without disappearing, how to win without becoming cruel. Those lessons didn't come from books, they came from sidewalks, from backyards, from games that ended only when the light was gone. As life accelerated, those teachings went quiet, but they never vanished, they waited. And now, decades later, I feel them again in moments of stillness, when the world pauses long enough for memory to breathe. Sometimes it happens unexpectedly. The smell of warm pavement after rain, the echo of a ball bouncing somewhere far away, the sound of children laughing freely, without awareness of time. In those moments, something ancient stirs inside me, a recognition, a return. I realize then that nostalgia isn't about wanting to go back, it's about remembering what matters, what shaped us, what made us human before we learned to be efficient. The games we played before screens gave us something rare. They gave us a sense of self that didn't depend on observation, on approval, on constant stimulation. And even though the world no longer looks like that, that part of us still exists, waiting quietly, patiently, for us to slow down enough to feel it again. By the time adolescence arrived, something had already begun to shift. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a season changing when no one is paying attention. I remember the first moments when the games didn't call as loudly anymore. The ball still bounced, the bikes still leaned against fences, but something inside us had started to look elsewhere. We didn't talk about it, we felt it. There was a growing awareness of self, of being seen, of being judged. A soft tension entered the body, subtle but persistent. I remember standing on the edge of the street one afternoon, watching others play, feeling both part of it and separate from it, as if childhood was slowly loosening its grip, not angrily but with acceptance. We stayed out a little less, came home a little earlier. Conversations shifted, they became quieter, more guarded. The world seemed bigger then, more complicated. Questions appeared that games couldn't answer. Who am I becoming? Where do I belong? What part of me do others see? The silence of the streets at dusk began to feel different, less magical, more reflective. And yet, those old games never truly disappeared. They lived beneath the surface, in muscle memory, in instinct, in the way we still understood fairness, cooperation, risk, and trust. I realize now that the games before screens prepared us for that transition. They gave us resilience. They taught us how to lose without breaking, how to win without cruelty, how to exist alongside others without needing constant affirmation. Even as technology began to creep in slowly, quietly, it hadn't yet consumed us. It was still a guest, not a ruler. There were still long pauses in conversation, still empty spaces in time, still room to think. I remember nights spent alone with my thoughts, not escaping them, letting them speak, letting them echo. There was discomfort in that, but also growth. That's something the modern world often tries to eliminate. Discomfort, waiting, uncertainty. But those moments shaped us. They carved depth into our inner lives. Looking back, I see that the end of those street games wasn't a loss, it was a transformation. They didn't vanish. They became foundations. They became the way we approach life, the way we navigate relationships, the way we understand joy and disappointment. Even now, decades later, when life becomes overwhelming, when everything feels too loud, too fast, I feel that old instinct rise up, that desire for simplicity, for presence, for moments that don't need witnesses. And I realize something quietly profound. We didn't stop playing because we grew up. We grew up carrying the echo of those games inside us. They were never just games. They were lessons in being human, learned slowly, before the world demanded speed. As the years passed, something else began to happen quietly, almost politely. The world started to speed up, and we didn't notice at first. I remember the first time a screen entered my private space and stayed there, not as a guest, but as a presence, a small glow in the corner of life that slowly grew brighter. At first, it felt harmless, convenient, even exciting. Information at our fingertips, entertainment on demand, connection without distance. But something subtle shifted. Time no longer stretched, it fractured. Moments broke into notifications. Silence became uncomfortable. Waiting felt unbearable. I didn't lose the old world all at once. I misplaced it slowly, like setting something down and forgetting where. One day, the streets felt quieter but not peaceful, empty, not resting. Children were inside. Doors were closed. The soundscape of laughter and argument and play faded into memory. I remember realizing, with a strange ache, that no one was calling anyone outside anymore. No names carried on the wind. No spontaneous gatherings. Plans required coordination, permission, screens. And yet, the longing never left. It waited. Sometimes it surfaced unexpectedly, in the smell of cut grass, in the sound of a distant ball hitting pavement, in the way late afternoon light still knows how to soften everything it touches. That longing isn't sadness, it's recognition. A part of us remembers a different pace, a different way of being human. I think that's why these memories return so strongly now. Not to trap us in the past, but to remind us of what still matters. Presence, embodiment, connection without mediation. The games we played before screens weren't perfect, but they were honest. They demanded attention, patience, forgiveness. They taught us how to lose without disappearing and how to win without dominating. They taught us how to be with one another. And maybe that's the quiet invitation hidden inside memory. Not to go backward, but to carry something forward. To remember that meaning doesn't come from speed, that joy doesn't need constant novelty. That time, when respected, gives back more than it takes. I don't want to romanticize the past. I want to listen to it, because every time I slow down enough, every time I let a moment breathe, I feel that old rhythm return, not outside me, inside, and I realize something deeply comforting. That child who played those games, who ran until sunset, who believed time was generous, they never truly left. They're still here, waiting. Whenever I choose to remember, now, as I stand here in the present, I feel the distance between then and now, more clearly than ever. Not as regret, but as reverence. Time did what time always does. It carried us forward. It took some people gently, others without warning. It changed streets, houses, voices, and dreams. And it asked us, quietly but firmly, to grow up. Yet somehow, not everything was lost. Because when I slow down enough, when I step away from the noise, when I allow silence to exist without trying to fill it, I feel it again. That same calm, that same grounded presence, that same sense that life is not something to chase, but something to inhabit. The games we played before screens taught us that. They taught us that meaning comes from participation, not observation. That joy deepens when it's shared in real space, real time, with real people. They taught us how to wait, how to lose, how to forgive quickly, how to imagine boldly, how to belong without performing. We didn't call it mindfulness. We didn't call it spirituality. But it was both. It was the soul learning how to be at home in the world. Now, when I see how fast everything moves, how moments are consumed instead of lived, I understand why memory pulls us back. Not because the past was perfect, but because it was present. The streets are quieter now, in a different way. Not peaceful, just empty. The games are gone. The sidewalks wait, patient and unused. And the silence feels heavier than it once did. But inside us, the echoes remain. Every laugh, every summer evening, every scraped knee and shared secret. Every unspoken understanding between friends who didn't know they were making history. Those memories didn't vanish. They became part of us. And maybe that's the quiet gift of growing older. We become carriers of a slower wisdom, a gentler rhythm, a deeper knowing that life is not measured in efficiency, but in presence. When the world feels overwhelming now, I close my eyes. I imagine the sun low in the sky, the sound of a distant voice calling my name, the feeling that tomorrow is promised and uncomplicated. And for a moment, just a moment, I am there again. Not to escape the present, but to remember how to live inside it. Because the child who played those games, who lived those days, who trusted the world enough to run freely through it, that child never truly left. They're still here, quiet, patient, waiting for us to slow down and come outside once more.